I am Joshua, 35, and my own brother introduced me to his billionaire boss as the family failure. Before I tell you how that exact moment destroyed his life and made me a fortune, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The air at the Mountain Lodge in Denver was absolutely freezing that night, but the tension inside the main banquet hall was completely suffocating. This was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of my younger brother Carter's life. His engagement party. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with high-level corporate executives, wealthy local socialites, and my parents, who were practically glowing with an unnatural, obsessive pride. Carter pulled up to the valet stand in his brand-new Porsche 911. The roar of the engine was designed to make everyone turn and look, and it worked. He tossed the keys to the young valet attendant with this arrogant, dismissive flick of his wrist that he had perfected over the last few years working his way up the corporate ladder. He walked into the lodge with his beautiful fiancée, Chloe, hanging on his arm, working the room like a seasoned politician running for office. I stood near the back of the room, holding a glass of club soda, watching the entire spectacle unfold. I was completely used to being the shadow in the room. I ran a very modest, independent financial consulting firm downtown. I worked brutal, 80-hour weeks fixing broken businesses, renegotiating debts, and keeping honest people from going bankrupt. It was hard, grueling, honest work, but to my family, it meant absolutely nothing. Because my name wasn't plastered in the local business magazines, and because I didn't drive a European sports car that cost more than a house, I was practically invisible to them. About an hour and a half into the event, the music swelled, and the champagne was flowing. That was when Carter finally spotted me standing near the ice sculpture. I saw that familiar, cruel smirk form on his face. It was the exact same look he gave me when we were kids right before he would break one of my toys and blame it on me. He leaned over and whispered something to a sharply dressed older man standing next to him. That man was Christopher Ramsey, the billionaire CEO of the massive logistics empire where Carter worked as a senior director. Carter grabbed Christopher by the shoulder with entirely too much familiarity and guided the billionaire directly toward my dark corner of the room. My parents, Robert and Barbara, trailed right behind them like eager, desperate bodyguards protecting a celebrity. Carter stopped right in front of me. He made sure to project his voice, ensuring it was loud enough for the surrounding tables of wealthy guests to hear every single word. "Mr. Ramsey, I want you to meet my older brother, Joshua," Carter announced, his voice dripping with absolute, unadulterated mockery. "He's the family failure. He does boring paperwork for small mom-and-pop shops downtown. He just never quite figured out how the real business world works." My mother, Barbara, actually sighed. She shook her head right there in front of a billionaire, a look of profound disappointment masking her face. "Such an embarrassment," she muttered loudly, making sure the society wives at the next table heard her. "He just lacks ambition. We tried our best, but some people just settle for mediocrity." My father chuckled awkwardly, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "We focus all our energy and resources on the child with actual potential, Christopher. You understand how the real world is. You have to back the winning horse." The room around us went completely dead silent. People at the adjacent tables stopped talking mid-sentence. The clinking of crystal glasses just ceased. The humiliation burned through my chest like battery acid. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth ached, and I could feel a thick vein pulsing hot against my temple, but I forced myself to stand completely still. I looked straight at Christopher Ramsey, refusing to break eye contact, refusing to look down at my shoes, and absolutely refusing to give my toxic family the satisfaction of seeing me crack under their weight. Christopher didn't laugh. He didn't even crack a polite, obligatory corporate smile. His sharp, calculating eyes darted from my brother's grinning, smug face to my parents' expectant expressions, and then settled entirely on me. He looked down at the simple, worn leather portfolio I held in my left hand, the exact same brand and style I had carried since I started my business over a decade ago. For a split second, I saw a flash of intense recognition ignite in his eyes. He paused. He took a slow, deliberate breath, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The silence stretched out, becoming heavy and unbearable for Carter. "Interesting," Christopher said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it commanded absolute, terrifying authority. He slowly turned his head to look at Carter. The smirk on my brother's face instantly vanished, completely wiped away and replaced by a pale, confused, and slightly panicked expression. "Carter," Christopher said, his tone icy, flat, and devoid of any warmth. "I'll see you in my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock sharp. Do not be late." He didn't wait for a response. Christopher gave me one final, deeply respectful nod, turned on his heel, and walked straight out of the lodge, leaving his champagne untouched on a passing waiter's tray. He left his own senior director standing there looking like a scolded, terrified child. My parents stared at the heavy oak doors in absolute shock, their mouths slightly open. I didn't say a single word. I set my club soda down on the nearest table, zipped up my coat, walked past my frozen brother, and headed out into the freezing Colorado night. As I started my old truck and began the long drive down the mountain, my hands were shaking violently on the steering wheel. I knew something massive had just shifted in the universe, but I had absolutely no idea that this was only the very beginning of the avalanche that was about to bury my brother alive. To truly understand why that moment of public humiliation at the lodge cut me so incredibly deep, you need to know exactly what happened 3 months earlier. I was sitting in my cramped downtown office, knee-deep in tax documents, bank statements, and payroll spreadsheets for a client. This particular client was a single mother fighting a brutal custody battle, and she desperately needed her small bakery's financials stabilized to prove to the judge she could provide a stable home. I was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep and stale coffee, when my cell phone rang. It was Carter. He never, ever called me unless he needed something desperately. "Joshua, I need a massive favor," he said. His voice was light, casual, like he was asking me to pick up a coffee instead of demanding my time. "Chloe and I are planning this massive engagement gala at the Mountain Lodge. I am completely swamped at work right now chasing a massive promotion. I can't take my eyes off the ball at the office. You're good at the boring, tedious stuff, right? Could you look over a few vendor contracts for me?" I should have said no. I knew I should have hung up the phone right then and there, but he was my brother. Despite the decades of blatant, unapologetic favoritism from our parents, despite the constant belittling at every Thanksgiving and Christmas, that toxic, lingering hope for some kind of real family connection still lived somewhere in the back of my mind. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I helped him with the biggest day of his life, he would finally respect me. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. He emailed over the files. It wasn't just a few contracts. It was a complete, unmitigated financial disaster. Carter had blindly signed agreements with high-end event coordinators, luxury florists, and gourmet caterers without reading a single page of the fine print. I spent 3 sleepless nights meticulously dissecting the paperwork. He had agreed to a predatory clause with the main venue that would have left him personally liable for tens of thousands of dollars in massive financial penalties if any vendor missed their delivery window by even 15 minutes. It was the kind of careless, arrogant mistake that completely destroys bank accounts and ruins lives. I got on the phone. I aggressively renegotiated the terms, threatening to pull the contracts entirely if they didn't amend the clauses. I forced the florists to drop thousands of dollars in hidden premium delivery charges. I pulled up spreadsheets, showed the catering company their direct competitors' pricing, and ruthlessly bullied them into dropping their exorbitant bar service rates by 20%. I fixed his entire, catastrophic mess quietly, working from my kitchen table at 3 in the morning so it wouldn't interfere with my actual paying clients. Carter never once asked what I changed. He just sent a quick, thoughtless text. "Thanks, man." Then came the real, immediate crisis. Exactly 2 weeks before the gala, I started getting frantic emails and voicemails from the lead photographer and the manager of the live band. The massive deposits were completely overdue. They were preparing to cancel the bookings immediately and take other clients. If they walked away, the venue would enforce their strict no-refund policy because the entertainment clauses were breached. The entire event, the whole facade of wealth and perfection, would completely collapse. I called Carter 5 times. I texted him. He sent me straight to voicemail every single time. He was too busy test driving that new Porsche and playing the big shot executive to bother paying his own bills. I sat at my desk and looked at my business account balance. I had just received a retainer from a new client. It was my entire operational budget for the next 2 months. It was the money I needed to pay my office rent, my utilities, and most importantly, my assistant's salary. Without hesitating, I transferred $14,000 of my own hard-earned money to cover his deposits. I wired $8,000 directly to the photographer and $6,000 to the band, securing the night. When Carter finally bothered to call me back 2 days later, I told him exactly what I had to do to save his event. "You're an absolute lifesaver, Josh," he laughed off, completely unbothered by the sheer panic he had caused. "Don't even worry about it. I'll wire you the money by Friday. I promise." Friday came and went. The money never arrived. I ate instant ramen for 3 solid weeks to ensure my assistant got her full salary on time. I delayed upgrading my office software. I absorbed the pain so he wouldn't have to. I did all of that to protect him. I saved him from total public humiliation in front of his wealthy future in-laws and corporate friends. And his repayment to me, his ultimate show of gratitude, was dragging me in front of his billionaire boss, pointing his finger at me, and labeling me a failure for the whole world to hear. Sitting in my truck that night, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white, I felt a deep, sickening realization settle permanently into my bones. I had spent my entire adult life setting myself on fire just to keep my family warm, and they were annoyed by the smoke. The loyalty was entirely one-sided. I was done. The brotherly bond was officially dead. The very next morning, a sleek, custom black SUV pulled up directly outside my modest office building. The vehicle looked entirely out of place in my working-class neighborhood. I watched through the cheap plastic blinds as Christopher Ramsey stepped out. He was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored navy suit, carrying a thick, heavy leather briefcase. He walked right past my stunned assistant, who was holding a stack of mail, and stepped right into my office. He stood there for a moment, looking around at the simple, scratched wooden desks, the cheap metal filing cabinets, and the framed credentials hanging on my wall. There was absolutely no pity in his eyes, only a deep, resonant respect. "Joshua," he said, stepping forward and offering a firm, heavy handshake that conveyed pure business. "Do you have time to talk?" I was shocked, but I hid it well. I guided him to the small, slightly wobbly conference table in the corner of the room. He sat down, placed his briefcase flat on the table, and looked at me dead in the eye. "Last night at the lodge," Christopher began, his voice perfectly even and measured, "when your brother introduced you, when I saw the way you stood there, completely composed, taking that unwarranted abuse without feeling the need to scream or shout or aggressively defend yourself, it triggered a memory, a very old one. On the drive home, the pieces finally clicked together." He leaned forward, resting his powerful hands on the table. 15 years ago, my father passed away. It was a massive, sudden heart attack. Right after the funeral, I was forced to take over Ramsey Logistics. We were in massive, suffocating debt. We had overexpanded, we were locked into terrible, predatory freight contracts, and we were bleeding cash daily. We were less than 60 days from a total bankruptcy filing. I was 26 years old, terrified, and about to lose my family's entire legacy. I remembered. The memories flooded back into my mind instantly. It was my very first year operating independently. A young, hungry financial consultant walked into my office. Christopher continued, his eyes locked onto mine. He didn't wear a fancy suit. He didn't ask for massive upfront fees. He spent 4 grueling weeks tearing through my books, working late into the night. He found every single leak. Overpaid vendor agreements, predatory loan terms hidden in the fine print, redundant shipping routes. He handed me a brilliant restructuring playbook that quite literally saved my company. He opened his briefcase with a sharp click and pulled out a faded, pristine document. He slid it slowly across the table. The cover page read, Joshua, independent financial consultant. You turned my company around, Christopher said quietly. And when I tried to pay you 3 months later after the profits finally started showing and we were in the green, you refused the check. You told me you couldn't take money from a man trying to save his father's legacy after a tragedy. You shook my hand and walked away. I stared down at the old report, feeling a strange tightness in my chest. I was just doing my job, Mr. Ramsey. Christopher, please. He tapped the folder with his index finger. That company you saved is now a multi-billion-dollar operation. My entire life, my family's security, thousands of employees' livelihoods. It all traces back to your intervention. So, when I heard your own flesh and blood call you a failure last night, I knew immediately that I had a serious, dangerous problem inside my own house. He reached into the briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker folder. This one had a red, highly classified stamp pressed onto the cover. Since Carter reports directly to me, I ordered a quiet, internal audit of his division 10 months ago. There were strange financial discrepancies that my accounting team couldn't quite explain. What we found was alarming. But finding an auditor who isn't compromised by corporate politics, who won't be swayed by threats or bribes, is incredibly difficult. He opened the folder, revealing stacks of highlighted spreadsheets. I need someone I trust with my life to handle this. Someone who cannot be bought. I am officially offering you a 6-month independent consulting contract to execute the final, absolute phase of this audit. The compensation is $250,000, with significant equity options upon successful completion. I stared at the number printed boldly on the paper. $250,000. It was more money than I made in 2 solid years of grinding. Christopher, I said carefully, leaning back in my chair, Carter is my brother. If I audit his department, if I am the one holding the knife, it could be seen as a massive conflict of interest. The board might reject it. The evidence is already locked down on secure servers, Christopher replied coldly. Your job isn't to judge him. Your job is to restructure the massive financial damage he caused, trace every stolen penny, and plug the holes. The numbers will speak for themselves. You just have to translate them for the board. I sat in silence for a long moment. I thought about the $14,000 Carter stole from my business account. I thought about the cruel, mocking sneer on my mother's face. I thought about the years of being pushed aside. I reached across the table, picked up my favorite pen, and signed the contract without another word. The next 2 weeks were an absolute blur of aggressive, relentless forensic accounting. Christopher gave me a temporary corner office at the Ramsey Logistics corporate headquarters, complete with a dedicated team of 3 highly skilled junior analysts who reported only to me. We locked the doors, ordered takeout, and went to absolute war on the data. What I found buried in the servers made my stomach physically turn. Carter wasn't just arrogant and entitled. He was a common, reckless thief playing dress-up in a corporate suit, believing he was entirely untouchable. The biggest, most glaring red flag was a massive, multi-million-dollar logistics optimization contract with a national retail chain. Carter had proudly taken sole public credit for it. He stood on the stage at the annual banquet, accepted the roaring applause, took the massive salary bump, and secured his senior promotion based entirely on the success of that single deal. But digging deep into the server logs and version histories of the documents, I found the ugly truth. A brilliant but quiet junior analyst named Nathan had spent 8 grueling months building the complex financial models, sourcing the raw market data, and writing every word of the initial proposal. Carter stepped in during the final 2 weeks, used his authority to order Nathan to send all communications exclusively through him, changed the names on the title slides, and presented it to the executive board as his own groundbreaking brainchild. He stole Nathan's career and his rightful promotion. But the theft didn't stop at intellectual property. I pulled 18 months of Carter's corporate expense reports and cross-referenced them with his company credit card statements. He was treating the company coffers like a personal, bottomless piggy bank. A lavish, wild weekend trip to Las Vegas was coded as client networking. A luxury hotel suite in Miami for Chloe was listed as vendor coordination. He aggressively expensed high-end tailored suits, designer Italian shoes, and even part of the down payment for his precious Porsche under the guise of executive presentation assets. The most sickening part? He had even billed the catering tasting and the florist consultation for his engagement party directly to the company account. The total fraudulent charges exceeded $110,000. Word travels incredibly fast in a glass corporate building. Carter found out I was in the building, and he found out exactly what department I was tearing apart. Late one Tuesday evening, while the floor was mostly empty, my office door swung open violently. Carter walked in, his face pale and sweating, his expensive tie loosened. He looked around the massive corner office, a flash of pure, venomous jealousy crossing his face before raw desperation took over. "Joshua," he stammered, quickly closing the door behind him and locking it. "What the hell are you doing here? Why are you in the audit department?" "My job," I said flatly, not taking my eyes off the monitor. He walked up to my desk and slammed his hands down on the wood. "They're auditing my expenses, the retail contract, everything. Joshua, it's getting really bad. HR is asking questions I can't answer." I finally looked up at him, letting the silence hang. "You stole $110,000, Carter. It should be bad." His eyes went wide with panic. "It's just creative accounting. Everyone does it at this executive level. Look, Christopher trusts you. He listens to you. If you just massage the numbers, or write a summary report saying my expenses were justified business development, I'll pay you. I'll give you whatever you want." "No." His face contorted. The desperation vanished, instantly replaced by that vicious, toxic entitlement I grew up with. "You owe me this. Mom and Dad's health can't take a scandal like this. You want to ruin the family name over some technicalities? You're really going to be a traitor to your own blood. Get out of my office, Carter," I said, my voice dangerously low. He backed away from the desk, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You're going to regret this. I'm not going down alone. If I sink, I'm dragging you with me." 2 days later, the real nightmare started. I was reviewing the secure shared network drives when I found a hidden, encrypted folder. Inside were dozens of emails. They appeared to be between Carter and me. The email address looked exactly like my professional consulting one, but with one single letter swapped in the domain name. The emails were horrific. They were detailed, step-by-step instructions from me telling Carter exactly how to hide his personal expenses under obscure corporate codes. They were explicitly designed to make me look like the criminal mastermind behind his entire embezzlement scheme. He was actively trying to frame me. He was perfectly willing to send his own brother to a federal prison just to save his own skin and keep his job. I didn't panic. I didn't call him to scream. I quietly, methodically ran a deep IP trace on the email headers. Every single fake email was created on Carter's personal workstation at his house. The digital fingerprints were absolutely undeniable. I compiled the metadata, printed the comprehensive logs, and walked them directly down to the legal department. The official disciplinary hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp on a Friday. The atmosphere in the executive wing was heavy enough to crush coal into diamonds. I sat in a darkened observation room equipped with one-way glass, located directly adjacent to the main executive boardroom. I had my laptop open, connected directly to the massive projector inside their room. My hands were perfectly steady. In the boardroom sat Christopher Ramsey at the head of the table, Marcus from the elite legal department, and Karen, the strict, uncompromising director of human resources. Carter walked into the room looking incredibly confident, almost arrogant. He had his suit perfectly pressed, every hair in place. He genuinely, truly believed he was about to outsmart a billionaire, manipulate the legal team, and successfully frame his own brother. He sat down, opened his leather folder, and offered a practiced, charming, utterly fake smile. "Thank you all for hearing me out this morning." Carter started smoothly, using his best presentation voice. "I know some of the recent expense numbers look highly irregular, but I operate in a very high-pressure, fast-paced environment. Sometimes administrative coding errors happen when you're busy securing multimillion-dollar deals for this company. I'm a big-picture guy, not an accountant. Karen didn't smile back. Her expression was carved from stone. Carter, we have over $110,000 in personal expenses explicitly billed to the company. Las Vegas trips, designer clothing, car down payment. This goes far, far beyond administrative errors. This is systematic theft. Carter feigned a look of deep, profound sorrow. He actually forced his eyes to well up slightly. I know, and I take full responsibility for trusting the wrong people. When I took this role, I sought outside financial counsel from an independent consultant to help me manage my department's budget. My brother, Joshua. He advised me on tax structures and expense coding. I didn't realize until it was way too late that his methods were highly illegal. He slid a stack of freshly printed emails across the mahogany table, the fake emails he had spent hours creating in his living room. I have documentation. Joshua explicitly instructed me to do this. I'm a victim of his terrible, predatory advice. He took advantage of my trust. Christopher Ramsey picked up the paper. He looked at it for a long, agonizing moment. Then, he slowly looked up at the one-way glass where I was sitting in the dark. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I hit the enter button on my laptop. The massive projector screen directly behind Carter suddenly flared to life, casting a bright, harsh light over his shoulders. Marcus, the corporate lawyer, folded his hands neatly on the table. Carter, that is a truly fascinating story. However, our IT department, in conjunction with our lead independent auditor, ran a deep, forensic trace on those specific email headers. The screen displayed the complex metadata logs. Bright, glowing red circles highlighted the specific IP addresses. These emails were not sent from Joshua's firm, Marcus stated coldly, his voice devoid of any mercy. They were created, drafted, and sent from the IP address registered directly to your personal home router. Furthermore, the keystroke logs from your company-issued laptop show you actively searching for ways to mask email domains and spoof sender addresses just 3 days ago. Carter completely froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. He slowly turned around to look at the massive screen, then turned back to the executives. His mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked exactly like a fish suffocating on dry land. The charming executive facade shattered into a million unfixable pieces. You attempted to defraud this company? Christopher Ramsey said, his voice echoing in the silent room like a heavy gavel strike. You stole the hard work of your subordinates to get a promotion. You embezzled corporate funds. And when caught, you attempted to frame an innocent man, your own flesh and blood, with forged digital documents. That crosses the line from gross misconduct into federal criminal fraud. Carter started hyperventilating. His hands shook violently as he grabbed the edge of the table. Wait, no. Mr. Ramsey, please. Let me explain. I can pay it back. I can get a massive loan. I'll sell the car. Just give me a chance to fix this. You're terminated, Carter, Karen from HR said sharply, cutting off his pathetic pleading. Effective immediately. All stock options are officially voided. Security is waiting outside the door right now to escort you off the premises. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. We will be filing a massive civil suit to recover every single penny of the stolen funds. In addition, all of this irrefutable evidence has already been forwarded to the district attorney's office. Given the scale of the forgery, I highly suggest you hire a very good criminal defense lawyer immediately. Carter stood up, his legs shaking so badly he had to lean heavily on the back of his chair just to stay upright. The heavy boardroom door opened, and 2 massive, unsmiling security guards stepped into the room. They didn't give him time to go back to his desk to pack his things. They handed him a standard, cheap cardboard box with his personal desk items already thrown inside. As they marched him out of the room, Carter passed right by the one-way glass. He couldn't see me standing there in the dark, but I was inches away from him. I watched his arrogant, perfect, meticulously crafted life completely disintegrate in real time. There was no joy in it, no jumping up and down in celebration, just a profound, icy, soul-deep relief. The parasite had finally been removed. De la koan kak they doi tat ca, kai tua koi kung de lay lai duak win kim so kuak doi min. Kam on ban de kien and kung tua den day. Ban that tuet voi. Lay jup toi like video va ben luan so one ben dui. De toi beat ban de dong han kung toi toi day. Junai kong chi jup nu nuoi han tim thay ka chuyen nai. Ma kan cho toi beat rang and hung tre niam qua toi ko wai nia voi ai do. Suung ho qua ben la dong luk lan not de toi tip tiu si chia se and hung fan kan lai qua han trin nai. The fallout from the boardroom was instantaneous, explosive, and utterly brutal. By Monday morning, the news of Carter's disgraceful, humiliating termination had spread through his elite social circle and the entire industry like a wildfire. Corporate circles in Denver are incredibly small and notoriously unforgiving. Once you get officially branded with embezzlement and digital forgery, you become utterly radioactive. Nobody would touch him. His beautiful fiancée, Chloe, didn't even wait for the dust to settle to make her move. Her parents had gone through a vicious, messy divorce over hidden finances and massive debt years ago, and she was absolutely terrified of being dragged into a financial black hole. When she found out Carter was facing a massive corporate lawsuit, complete asset seizure, and potential criminal charges, she packed her expensive bags. She called a lawyer, immediately canceled the luxury wedding venue, handed the diamond engagement ring back to Carter without shedding a single tear, and moved out of their penthouse apartment before dinner time. Then, my personal cell phone started ringing. It was my mother. I stared at the screen, letting it ring 5 times before I finally took a deep breath and answered. "Joshua!" She screamed through the speaker, her voice shrill and hysterical. "What did you do? What did you tell them? Carter is ruined. Chloe left him. He's facing jail time and they took his car. How could you do this to your own brother?" I sat back in my new, expensive leather chair at Ramsey Logistics, looking out at the city. "I didn't do anything, Mom. Carter stole money. Carter forged documents. He made his choices, and now he is paying the price. You were the lead auditor." My father's voice boomed aggressively in the background. He had put me on speakerphone so they could tag team me. "You could have covered for him. You could have buried the paperwork or deleted the files. Family protects family, Joshua. You are a selfish, spiteful, jealous son." "He tried to frame me for federal fraud, Dad," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "He actively tried to send me to a federal prison just so he could keep his sports car and his fake life. Is that how family protects family?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the line. They didn't care. The silence confirmed everything I had ever feared. They honestly didn't care that he tried to destroy my life, strip me of my freedom, and ruin my career, as long as their golden boy was safe and their image was intact. "Don't ever call us again," my mother sobbed bitterly, and the line went dead with a sharp click. I placed the phone face down on the desk. I thought I would feel heartbroken. I thought I would cry. But I didn't. I just felt incredibly, unbelievably tired. But beneath that exhaustion was a clean, pure sense of freedom. I had finally stopped drinking the poison they kept serving me. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my office. It was made of expensive, heavy parchment paper. I opened it carefully. It was from my Uncle Thomas. Uncle Thomas was my father's older brother. He was a quiet, highly observant man who never got involved in the toxic family drama. He lived out in the quiet suburbs, managed his own business, and mostly kept to himself during the holidays. But the handwritten note inside the envelope was anything but quiet. "Joshua, I have watched this family treat you like absolute dirt for 30 years. I have watched them praise a thief and ignore a saint. I have stayed silent to keep the peace, hoping your parents would wake up. I will not be silent anymore. I am hosting a mandatory family dinner this Sunday at my house. Everyone will be there. Your parents, your brother, your cousins. It is time they look in the mirror. Come to the house. There are things about your past, about your grandfather's inheritance and your stolen college fund, that you need to hear right now. Thomas. I stared at the words college fund. The words burned into my retinas. I had worked 2 grueling, full-time jobs, scrubbing floors and waiting tables, to put myself through a cheap state college because my parents told me the family had absolutely no savings left to help me. I folded the letter slowly, slipped it into my suit jacket pocket, and looked out the massive window at the Denver skyline. The storm at the office was finally over, but the real, devastating hurricane was waiting for me at that dinner table on Sunday. And this time, armed with the truth and my own undeniable success, I wasn't going to hide in the shadows anymore. I was going to walk right into the center of it. Sunday evening arrived with a bitter, biting cold that swept down from the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains and settled heavily over the Denver suburbs. The sky was a bruised, dark purple as I pulled my truck onto my Uncle Thomas's street. I parked at the very end of his long, snow-lined driveway and sat there for a full 10 minutes before turning off the ignition. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled in the freezing air. I looked through my windshield at the cars parked in front of the modest, single-story ranch house. My parents' pristine, silver Lexus SUV was parked right near the front door, gleaming under the porch light. My older cousin Elijah's battered, family minivan was parked unevenly on the frozen grass. David's heavy-duty work truck took up the other side of the driveway. And tucked away in the absolute furthest corner, looking entirely out of place and pathetic, was a rusted 10-year-old compact sedan. Carter's gleaming Porsche 911 was completely gone. It had likely been seized by the corporate lawyers to cover his massive debts, or he had desperately sold it to pay for his mounting legal defense team. Seeing that cheap, rusted car sitting there gave me the first genuine sense of validation I had felt in days. I took a deep breath, letting the icy winter air fill my lungs until they stung, and stepped out of the truck. The snow crunched loudly under my boots. Walking up the concrete steps to that front door felt like walking up to the gallows, but for the first time in my entire life, I was absolutely certain I was no longer the one with my head in the noose. I was holding the lever. Uncle Thomas opened the heavy oak door before I even had the chance to knock. He looked significantly older than I remembered. His face was deeply lined with the heavy weight of the secrets he had been carrying for our family, but his dark eyes were sharp, focused, and entirely unyielding. He didn't offer a fake, polite holiday smile. He simply reached out, gripped my shoulder with a surprisingly strong hand, and gave me a single, firm nod. It was a silent, powerful promise that things were about to change. I took off my coat and walked slowly into the dining room. The massive wooden table was meticulously set for 10 people. A huge, perfectly cooked roast sat in the center, surrounded by steaming bowls of mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and fresh rolls. But the rich smell of the food was entirely overpowered by the thick, suffocating, absolutely toxic tension radiating through the room. My mother, Barbara, sat rigidly at the far end of the table. She wore her best pearl necklace and a forced, painfully tight smile that completely failed to reach her eyes. My father, Robert, sat directly next to her, aggressively scrolling through his smartphone, as if he were actively trying to ignore the entire world around him. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. And then there was Carter. He sat directly across from them, and he looked completely, shockingly unrecognizable. The arrogant, slick, perfectly groomed corporate director who had mocked me at the lodge was entirely gone. His expensive haircut was unkempt and greasy. His face was pale, hollow, and drawn with extreme stress. He wore a faded, oversized gray sweater that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. He stared intensely at his empty porcelain dinner plate, absolutely refusing to look up or make eye contact when I pulled out my wooden chair and sat down across from him. My cousins, Elijah and David, sat on the opposite side of the table. They exchanged extremely uneasy, nervous glances with each other. Their wives sat silently beside them, hands folded perfectly in their laps, completely terrified to make a single sound. Everyone knew a bomb was sitting in the middle of the table, and Uncle Thomas was holding the match. "All right," Uncle Thomas announced loudly, walking into the room with a heavy stride and taking his designated place at the head of the massive oak table. "Everyone is finally here. Before we pass a single plate of food, before we bow our heads, and before we sit here and pretend for one more minute that we are a happy, functional family having a lovely Sunday dinner, we are going to have a very real, very ugly conversation." My father immediately cleared his throat, sitting up straighter and puffing out his chest in an attempt to assert his usual dominance. "Thomas, please, be reasonable. It has been a very difficult, incredibly stressful week for Carter and for our family's public reputation. We are dealing with a lot of vicious corporate rumors. Let's just eat this wonderful meal and keep things positive tonight." "Shut your mouth, Robert," Uncle Thomas said. His voice wasn't a yell, but the sheer, concentrated authority in his tone cut through the dining room like a perfectly sharpened chef's knife. My father's mouth snapped shut instantly. The color drained from his face. My mother gasped quietly, her hand flying up to clutch her pearl necklace in absolute shock. Ever since my grandfather's funeral over a decade ago, nobody in the entire extended family had ever dared to speak to my father that way. He was the patriarch. He was untouchable. Until tonight. "I have watched this family rot from the inside out for 30 years, Thomas continued, his intense gaze sweeping slowly over my parents, lingering on their shocked faces, and then landing incredibly hard on Carter. "I have watched Robert and Barbara build a golden, worshipful altar for one son, while treating their other son like absolute garbage on the bottom of their shoes. I stayed out of it for years because I thought it wasn't my place. I thought Joshua would eventually pack his bags and walk away from your toxicity. But after what happened this week at Ramsey Logistics, after the unbelievable evil I witnessed, my silence ends tonight." "He tried to completely destroy his own brother," my mother suddenly shrieked, losing her polite country club facade entirely. She pointed a shaking, manic, accusatory finger directly across the table at me. "Joshua audited his own flesh and blood. He manufactured lies. He got Carter fired. He cost my boy his massive corporate salary, his senior promotion, and his beautiful fiancée. Chloe completely left him and canceled the wedding because of Joshua's petty, pathetic jealousy. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my hands to defend myself. I didn't say a single word. I just sat back in my chair, perfectly still, and let her scream her delusions into the room." Uncle Thomas slammed his heavy, calloused fist down on the solid oak table. The silverware rattled violently against the porcelain plates. A crystal water glass tipped over, spilling cold water across the linen tablecloth, but nobody dared to move to clean it up. "Carter got himself fired because he is a liar, a manipulator, and a convicted corporate thief," Thomas roared, his face turning a deep, furious shade of red. "He stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company to fund his pathetic playboy lifestyle. He stole the hard work of his junior co-workers. And when he was finally backed into a corner by his own greed, he actively tried to frame Joshua to take the fall. He used a computer to forge documents to send his own brother to a federal prison just to save his own skin. And you too," he pointed a rigid finger directly at my parents, "are sitting in my house, eating my food, actively defending a criminal while crucifying the only decent, honorable person sitting at this table." Carter physically shrank down in his wooden chair, pulling his shoulders up to his ears, looking exactly like a terrified, cornered rat trapped in a basement. He didn't deny a single word Thomas said, because he knew I had the exact digital receipts to bury him. "Let me tell you the absolute truth about the son you love to call a failure," Thomas said, his voice dropping from a furious roar to a low, intense, vibrating rumble. He looked directly into my mother's wide, panicked eyes. 8 years ago, when I had my massive heart attack, my terrible health insurance completely refused to cover the emergency bypass surgery. I was going to lose this very house we are sitting in. I was actively preparing to sit down with a lawyer and declare total bankruptcy. My mother frowned deeply, her carefully constructed reality starting to fracture. She looked genuinely confused. You took out a second mortgage, Thomas. You told Robert and me that you handled the finances with the bank. I lied to your faces to protect his privacy, Thomas said, pointing a steady hand directly at me. Joshua paid it. Joshua walked into that hospital billing department, sat down with the stern financial administrators, and paid $40,000 entirely out of his own pocket. He completely wiped out his entire business savings to save my life. He made me swear on a Bible never to tell you or Robert, because he knew deep in his soul, that you would somehow find a way to belittle his sacrifice or demand he do the same for Carter. The dining room went completely, terrifyingly dead silent. You could hear the wind howling violently against the frosted window panes outside. Elijah, my older cousin who had been staring at his hands the entire night, slowly raised his head. When my commercial landscaping business went completely under during the recession, Elijah said quietly, his voice cracking heavily with unshed tears and deep emotion, I was facing total foreclosure on my home. I had a desperately pregnant wife and $20 in my checking account. Joshua drove to my house in the middle of a blizzard at 2 a.m. and handed me a $20,000 cashier's check. It was an interest-free loan. He saved my marriage. He saved my home. He kept my family off the streets. David, sitting directly across from Elijah, swallowed hard and nodded slowly. When my ex-wife dragged me through that brutal, vicious custody battle for my daughter, I was completely broke. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I was going to lose my little girl. Joshua paid my entire legal retainer. He worked pro bono every single weekend for my ex-wife's failing small bakery business, so we could finally settle things amicably without destroying our kid's life in a courtroom. He never asked for a single dime back. Not once. He just wanted my daughter to have her dad. My mother stared at me. Her jaw went completely slack. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically around the room, completely unable to process the sheer magnitude of the information hitting her. The comfortable, convenient narrative she had meticulously built in her head for 35 years, the story that I was a bitter, selfish, unsuccessful loser who lacked ambition, was violently, aggressively falling apart right in front of her eyes. He is the absolute moral backbone of this entire family, Thomas said, his voice thick with raw, unfiltered emotion. He has quietly, without any fanfare or applause, saved almost every single person sitting at this table tonight. And how exactly did you repay his endless loyalty, Robert? Look at him. Look your son in the eyes and tell everyone in this room what you did. My father's face went completely sickly pale. The arrogant patriarch was entirely gone. He looked like a terrified old man. Thomas, do not do this. I am warning you. This is family business. It is private. It stays between us. It officially stops being private when you allow your golden boy to try and destroy him in a corporate boardroom. Thomas fired back mercilessly, slamming his hand on the table again. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and his angry eyes suddenly filled with a deep, profound sadness. Joshua, I am so sorry I didn't tell you this sooner. When your grandfather died right after the funeral, he left a very specific, legally binding inheritance for you and Carter. It was a dedicated, locked college fund. $50,000 for each of you. It was explicitly meant to give you both a clean, debt-free head start in life. My heart physically stopped beating in my chest. The air was violently sucked out of my lungs. The room started to spin slightly. I never saw a single penny of that money, I said. My voice was barely above a whisper, but in that silent room, it sounded like a gunshot. Mom and Dad sat me down in the living room and told me there was absolutely nothing left after the funeral expenses. They told me I had to take out massive federal student loans if I wanted an education. They looked you in the eyes and they lied to you, Thomas said, glaring at my parents with pure, unadulterated disgust. Robert and Barbara brought in a shady lawyer, bypassed the trust mandates, and completely forged your signature on the financial release documents the week you turned 18. They drained your entire $50,000 college fund down to zero. I slowly, deliberately turned my head and looked directly at my father. He absolutely refused to meet my eyes. He stared a hole into the white linen tablecloth. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would shatter. "What exactly did you do with my money, Dad?" I asked. My voice wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly, unnervingly calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a hurricane makes landfall. We made an important family investment," my mother blurted out, her voice defensive, high-pitched, still desperately, pathetically clinging to her delusions of grandeur. "Carter got accepted into that incredibly elite private university in California. He desperately needed a luxury apartment near the campus to network with the right wealthy people. He needed a reliable, expensive European car to look the part of a future executive. You were always so independent, Joshua. You always figured things out on your own. You were a survivor. You didn't need the money to succeed like Carter did. We had to ensure his future, Joshua. You have to understand. They stole my entire future to buy him a sports car. They watched me work 50 grueling hours a week scrubbing greasy floors in a late-night diner. They watched me take on massive, suffocating student loan debt that took me over a decade of eating ramen noodles to finally pay off. They watched me struggle, sweat, and bleed, all while they secretly used my grandfather's dying gift, my rightful inheritance, to fund my brother's lavish fraternity parties and luxury vacations. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Carter. He finally, slowly looked up at me. There was absolutely no apology in his hollow eyes. There was no remorse. There was only the pathetic, incredibly empty look of a man who suddenly realized his entire existence, his entire personality, was built entirely on stolen money, fraud, and a mountain of lies. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the heavy oak table. I didn't scream, and I didn't shed a single solitary tear. The deep, heavy, suffocating iron anchor that had been dragging me down into the dark ocean for 35 years simply snapped. The chain broke. I felt lighter than air. I felt completely, utterly invincible. I stood up from the table slowly. I carefully pushed my wooden chair back in, ensuring it was perfectly aligned with the table. I smoothed down the front of my suit jacket. "Joshua," Uncle Thomas said softly, the anger leaving his voice entirely. "Thank you, Uncle Thomas," I said, my voice incredibly clear, steady, and ringing with absolute finality. "Thank you for the dinner, and thank you for finally giving me the truth." I turned slowly to look at my parents one last time. They looked up at me, their eyes wide with fear, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of what they had just permanently destroyed. "Do not ever call my phone again," I said, my words dropping like heavy stones onto the table. "If you ever show up at my corporate office, I will have corporate security physically remove you and I will have you arrested for trespassing. If you attempt to contact me through email, mail, or through my cousins, I will immediately have my lawyer file a brutal harassment suit and a restraining order against both of you. You are officially no longer my parents. And Carter, you are no longer my brother. Enjoy the miserable, pathetic life you built on my back. You deserve exactly what is coming to you." I turned my back on them. I walked out the front door and closed it firmly behind me. I didn't look back through the windows. I stepped out into the freezing, violent Colorado night snowstorm, pulled my heavy coat tight around my shoulders, and took a massive, incredibly deep breath. The freezing air burned my lungs, but it felt incredibly pure and clean. For the first time in my entire life, I was completely, wonderfully, beautifully alone. And I was finally free. 1 year later, the sprawling Denver skyline looked completely different to me. It didn't look like a city of closed doors and struggles anymore. It looked like a city I finally conquered. I stood confidently by the massive, spotless floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new corner executive office, located right in the pulsing heart of the downtown financial district. The crisp morning sun was reflecting brilliantly off the surrounding glass high-rises, painting the entire city in a bright, vibrant, promising gold. The grueling 6-month restructuring contract with Christopher Ramsey had been an absolute, undeniable, historic success. We utilized every resource available to hunt down every single stolen penny Carter had embezzled. We completely gutted and restructured the bloated logistics division. Most importantly, we officially gave Nathan, the brilliant, quiet junior analyst whose work Carter had mercilessly robbed, the senior director promotion and the massive salary increase he actually deserved. Christopher Ramsey was a man of his absolute word. When the consulting contract officially ended, he didn't just write me a check for $250,000 and shake my hand. He offered me a highly coveted, permanent position on his elite executive advisory board. It came with a highly lucrative, multimillion-dollar salary, full corporate benefits, and massive stock equity options that secured my financial future forever. Fueled by Ramsey's powerful, public endorsement, my independent financial consulting firm completely exploded overnight. Elite, high-paying corporate clients who valued absolute integrity, discretion, and actual results over flashy corporate buzzwords flooded my phone lines. I hired a brilliant team of 5 top-tier financial analysts. I bought a beautiful, secluded house up in the quiet mountains. I completely paid off the absolute last of my old business debts. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving on a level my family could never even comprehend. The news about my former family still filtered back to me occasionally through Uncle Thomas, though I made it strictly, aggressively clear that I rarely wanted to hear any updates. Carter's life completely and totally imploded, exactly as the corporate lawyers promised it would in that boardroom. Ramsey Logistics filed a massive, relentless civil suit against him to recover the embezzled corporate funds. Terrified of facing hard federal prison time for wire fraud, Carter agreed to a brutal, financially devastating settlement. He was forced to liquidate absolutely everything he owned. He sold the beloved Porsche 911 at a massive financial loss to a dealership. He was evicted from his luxury downtown penthouse apartment. The entire corporate financial industry blacklisted him completely. Nobody would even hire him to run a cash register. Without his fake corporate resume, his tailored suits, and his stolen money, he was absolutely nothing. The last I heard from Thomas, Carter was working long, grueling, miserable night shifts as a low-level freight dispatcher for a minor, failing trucking company way out in the industrial suburbs. He was driving a beat-up, 20-year-old sedan, living in a tiny, cramped studio apartment, and his meager wages were heavily garnished every single week to pay back his massive debt to Christopher Ramsey. My parents didn't fare much better in the aftermath. The massive, highly public corporate scandal surrounding Carter's termination completely destroyed their precious, heavily guarded social standing in their elite circles. The wealthy country club friends they had spent decades trying to impress and manipulate dropped them instantly, treating them like pariahs. The deep shame, combined with the extreme financial strain of desperately trying to help Carter pay his exorbitant criminal lawyer retainers, finally broke them. There were constant, bitter, nasty rumors circulating through the extended family of a looming, incredibly messy divorce between Robert and Barbara. They lived alone in that big, empty, silent house, completely isolated from their community, spending their days bitterly blaming each other for their golden boy's spectacular, humiliating downfall. They desperately tried to reach out to me a few times when the money started running dry. Right around Thanksgiving, a long, rambling, incredibly pathetic voicemail from my mother somehow slipped through my carrier's blocked numbers list. She cried hysterically into the phone, talked about how much they missed their strong oldest son, and very subtly, manipulatively hinted that they were struggling to pay their massive property taxes and needed a small loan. I hit the delete button on the voicemail before she even finished her sentence. I didn't feel a single shred of guilt. I didn't feel a burning desire for revenge or spite, either. I just felt a deep, unshakable, profound peace in my soul. The massive amounts of energy I used to pour into fixing their broken lives, the thousands of dollars I used to spend trying to buy their impossible toxic approval, was now entirely selfishly invested in my own beautiful future. I walked away from the massive window, sat down at my heavy, polished mahogany desk, and opened my laptop. I had a major meeting in 10 minutes with a new corporate client whose business desperately needed saving. It was incredibly hard work, but it was my work. I built this entire beautiful life with my own 2 hands, with absolutely zero inheritance, zero family support, and zero stolen funds. When you finally find the courage to stop carrying the dead weight of toxic people on your back, you realize exactly how incredibly fast and how incredibly far you can actually run. If there is one massive, undeniable truth you can take away from my long journey, it is this: toxic favoritism, narcissism, and unchecked entitlement will always, eventually, consume the very people who practice it. For entirely too many years, I falsely believed that just because they shared my blood, I inherently owed them my total loyalty, my hard-earned money, and my mental sanity. I foolishly believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I sacrificed enough of my own happiness, and if I quietly fixed enough of their disastrous mistakes, they would eventually wake up and love me the exact same way they loved my brother. But listen to me closely. Shared blood absolutely does not excuse systemic abuse. A shared last name is not a free, lifelong pass to exploit someone's kindness and drain their resources. The absolute hardest lesson I ever had to learn in my 35 years of life was that you cannot heal a family that completely denies it is sick. Sometimes the most powerful, the most loving, and the most necessary thing you can ever do for yourself is to establish an unbreakable, permanent boundary and simply walk away. You do not owe anyone your bright future, especially those people who willingly and maliciously tried to destroy it for their own gain. Setting strict boundaries isn't an act of petty revenge. It is the ultimate act of deep, necessary self-preservation. I genuinely want to know what you think about all of this. What is the absolute biggest lesson you took away from how I handled my toxic family and the corporate betrayal? Drop your honest perspective in the comments section below. Or, if you simply agree with my final decision to cut them off, just comment the word "good," so I know you appreciate the incredible value of walking away from toxic people and protecting your own peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story.